Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It's such a pleasure to be here and to present someone who is so amazing, Luiz Lima. But before we get to Luiz, let's just say welcome everyone to the right, Luiz? The fourth episode of a special series on the mechanics of mediumship. If we remember, the book Mechanics of Mediumship was psychographed by Francisco Cândido Xavier and Valdo Vieira, and they really are written by spiritual author André Luiz. And to me, Luiz, it is one of the most technical and uh, scientifically inspired work in the Spiritist literature.
It
I
is.
don't know if you're right. You agree with that? So it is because it brings that narrative with that type of language. It's one of the most difficult and perhaps one of the most misunderstood content. So, what did Andre Luis try to bring to us? Well, Andre, through this book, explained the phenomena of mediumship, all the mechanics, but he does that through maybe this mix, this combination of spiritual insights and also analogies from physics, biology, and other theories of wave theory, electromagnetic theory. But, anyways, back to this series. We are today on the fourth episode, and over the course of the series, we are together here learning about the subject, and it's a subject that has fascinated people for centuries, right?
Yeah.
But it remains very, I don't know, veiled in mystery. So there's a lot of curiosity, and as such, people may abuse it for personal agenda. That's not what we're trying to do here. We have Luis Lima, who is going to guide us on this journey. And Luis is a seasoned expert in spiritism and mediumship, and he's here to lead us the way to kind of, okay, got it, Luis, you broke it down, got it. So that we can better access the content and really understand, not just read if you have the book, but really understand the content, that it's so important for us to do it. And so for all of us, if you're new to the subject or maybe you've just been curious about it, this series of episodes are here to shed light on the nature of spiritual communication. And to me, what's most important is the profound impact it can have in our own understanding of ourselves, of the universe, right? So let's deep dive into this. And if you have not listened, watched the former episodes, or maybe you have not met Luis previously, I would like to introduce you, Luis, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
So, Luis Lima is from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and he moved to the United States in 3 decades ago, roughly in 1990, so 3.5 decades ago, and he was, he came in contact with spiritism, and I guess he drank the Kool-Aid. I'm just kidding, Louise. I'm just kidding. But because of its transformative power in terms of knowledge and understanding, right? Louise not only learned, but he became someone who is an example by being able to lecture on the subject in both languages, English and Portuguese. And he has I'm so jealous, Liz. He has the pleasure to be to be living, sorry, in between US and Portugal. He lives in Orlando, Florida, but part of his life or his year is also in Porto, in Portugal. He is an engineer. He holds a bachelor degree in that discipline and works in computer network. Luis, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to go back to the back and pass the mic to you, and I'll come back at the end of your presentation. Thank you so very much for being here.
All right, Marcia, thank you so much for the invitation. And here we go. This is program number 4. As Marcia mentioned in the beginning, the book is roughly, in one phrase, a scientific view on mediumship. However, it's written and narrated by a discarnate spirit, not by one of us here. And that is where the difference is. So anyhow, on the previous 3 programs, we covered what you see on the screen, the phenomena itself on program number 1, about the medium person, the medium, on program number 2, and on program number 3, we spoke about physical effects. Today, on this program, we are going to talk about something called psychometry, which is one of the chapters on the book. So we are not going to stay within the boundaries of that chapter in the book. We're going to expand more using different resources, but we're going to stick to this subject today, psychometry. So what is psychometry, right? Psychometry is a word that is used not only in mediumship, it is also used in psychology, and the meaning is completely different. So in psychology, the word psychometry or psychometric or anything in that sense has to do with how much the mind, that's the psycho part of the word, the mind influences our behavior. And if you could measure, and thus the word metric, if you could measure how much the mind influences on our daily lives. That's not what we are talking about today. That's not what psychometry means to us in Spiritism or in spirituality even. If we go to the regular dictionary, and here's the most popular American dictionary, this is the definition. I just took a copy of the words. This is the definition from Merriam-Webster. Psychometry is a divination of facts concerning an object or its owner through contact or proximity to the object. If you go to the most famous British dictionary, it's along the same lines, where they say psychometry is a process whereby facts or impressions about a person or thing are received through contact with an object associated with the subject of the impressions. That's a lot of words. So let's try to make it simple or simpler. Psychometry is the ability that certain people called mediums have to touch an object and tell a history about the object or its owner, previous owner. That's in very simple words, that's what it is. However, for the medium to be able to read that information and bring the information, the medium has to go through a process called soul disengagement. So before we even go into psychometry, we need to spend a few minutes talking about soul disengagement. As the words say, disengagement, so there's going to be some sort of disconnection or something similar to that. So the soul is going to disconnect, and the soul of the medium goes out there. Let's just put it this way, very simple. Just goes out there seeking information about an object. This is what it is. So soul disengagement, it's also a process. The medium doesn't become a medium like in 2 nanoseconds, like I'm talking to you and then I become a medium doing things. No. Some mediums go into trance faster, some not so fast. However, it's a process. Those who are able to get into trance very fast is because they have trained their mind, their body to do so, but it's a process. And the process begins with everything that we discussed so far in the previous 3 programs. So it all starts when the medium concentrates on the work that he wants to do. And that's called, if you need to go back to the previous programs, it's called conditioned reflex. So the medium will use his or her conditioned reflex to concentrate, put his mind to work on the goal of the work or what needs to be done. Once that's in place, there's gonna the nerves. So we're talking about physical, sorry, biology. The nerves are going to start acting. So there's a mechanical dislocation of the nerve forces in the vital centers. Vital centers are our chakras. So those chakras are going to start to participate in the process. Once again, just going back 1 minute to previous programs, we perceive the material world using our 5 senses, but we do not perceive the spiritual world with those 5 senses. We need something different. That something different are the vital centers or the chakras. So the chakras or these vital centers is what's going to allow us as spirits, although incarnated but still spirits, to be able to relate to the spirit world out there. So after this, there's going to be a liberation of these vital forces, these vital centers, meaning as if you were expending, as if you were losing connection to those. The ties that actually tie those spiritual, the paraspirit to the physical body start to be not so tight in the beginning. It's going to be loose at a certain point. As this happens, the potentialities that we have as people through our 5 senses will be transferred to the perispirit, which is what really goes out there. The body stays like a dream, right? You're dreaming that you are whatever in Paris, but you're not physically. Your body is just lying down on the bed. But the potentialities are in the perispirit, which goes out there, just like a dream. Once this, the process starts of providing the perispirit with these potentialities, the sensibility increases. So the person becomes more sensible. For example, sometimes you'll hear something, but you can't tell exactly what it is because it's very, very low. You can't really hear. Somebody who is just sitting with you by your side, oh no, I heard that well. So each person is different. So one person has better abilities in hearing than others. However, when you start this process of soul disengagement, it changes. Everybody kind of has the same. It increases our sensibility, which would be equivalent to our 5 senses. As this happens, the soul starts to disengage. So we got to a point that we call the disengagement of the spiritual body. However, being very clear, there's never a full disconnect. There is no such a thing. The soul is always connected to the body, with not so tight as when you are just in your regular business day, for example, but still it is attached. So once this soul acquires all these increasing sensibilities and it disconnects, we see that in this process, the soul disengages from the body and becomes more freely to enter a relationship with other spirits in the spirit world. So it's a process. One thing has to happen after the other. You just don't go out there and, let me disengage here. No. all this process that we see so far, and it continues, it can happen very fast. However, it still happens, all of these things. So now the disengagement of the spiritual body means the soul becomes more freely to enter a relationship with other spirits. So there's the increasing sensibility that we saw now gets to its max. So now that spirit has an expanded sensibility. So the soul at this point develops expanded sensibility, as if each of the five senses of the body had acquired increasing ability. So the soul uses more of its faculties. It's like hearing becomes clearer, better, taste becomes more accurate, all of those things. So this is what we call soul disengagement. And once the disengagement of the spiritual body takes place, the next thing that happens is the spirit is now out there in the spirit world. It blends into the spiritual realm, and it will do whatever the purpose of doing all of this was. What we see here happens in every single medium mystic process, regardless of type of mediumship. If it's going to be psychography, psychophony, it doesn't matter. This happens in all of them. Soul disengagement is a starting point of mediumship and communication with other spirits. However, when it gets to this point, the spirit can do two things. One is it can just go by itself, using its own resources. If that happens, we call this animism, meaning we spoke about this on the first program, meaning it is not necessary to have a discarnate spirit participating in the project. Or the spirit, once it blends into the spiritual realm, it can partner with the discarnate spirit, and that's what we call mediumship. If you go back to program number 1, we give you several different examples of each one. So animism is this thing where the soul disengages, the spirit is now in the spiritual realm, and it will go by itself. It does not need to partner with a discarnate spirit. One of the consequences of animism, or one of the possibilities, is psychometry. Remember, psychometry is the ability that the medium has that it touches the object and you will be able to bring information on the object. It does not need, it can have help, but it's not needed to have a participation of a discarnate spirit. We saw a definition of psychometry through our regular dictionaries. So now this is definition from Spirit André Luiz, which is the spiritual author of the book. So here it is. In medium mystic circle psychometry, and you see, he makes very clear that this is the definition within medium mystic circles, because remember, the word is used in other senses in other areas. In medium mystic circles, psychometry is defined as the extrasensory ability, this is interesting, to perceive the hidden side of the surroundings and to read impressions and memories by handling objects and documents. Meaning, I touch an object, if I am one of those mediums, not everybody is, I will touch an object and will be able to tell a history about the object, maybe its owner. This book belongs to a series of books that we also mentioned in the beginning, a series of 12 books. Psychometry is also one chapter in one of the other books of the series that was written before this one. And the other book is called In the Realms of Mediumship, which also has a chapter called Psychometry. The difference is, in the book In the Realms of Mediumship, what you're going to see is the author is going to tell stories and experience that he had in the spirit world. In the book that we are studying, it's a scientific view of the process. So it's not that one is good, the other is bad. and they don't really cross-reference in a way. They complement each other. On this other book, In the Realms of Mediumship, the definition of psychometry uses less words, and it's probably more easier to understand, I would say. In mediumistic work, you see again, the author is very strict about using the word within its context. In mediumistic work, psychometry designates the faculty of reading impressions and memories by touching ordinary objects. This is a very straightforward definition, very few words. However, that's exactly what it is. It's a faculty of reading impressions and memories by touching ordinary objects. And then you say, what do you mean memories? Whose memories? Right? And that's what we are going to explore here. The memories for those who had the object, they used to be owners, they think they're still owners. That's what we are here for, to discuss psychometry. So hopefully, at least we got, acquainted with the correct definition of psychometry. So here we go. Imagine that I send you to a corner of a house, for example. This, you would have the floor and two walls, so you are at a corner. And I just say, well, let's do a quick exercise here. Go to the corner, the very corner, and come up front 5 feet. So you get a tape, measurement tape, 5 feet, and you stop right there. Here I am. And I say, well, now go into the center of the room, for example, 7 feet. And you go 7 feet, and you say, here I am. And I say, now go up 3 feet. And you go up 3 feet. And then it's like a location. If you follow with your fingers, for example, now you have your finger situated 5 feet away to the front, 7 feet away to the right, and 3 feet away to the top. And I ask you, what's in there? What do you see? And you say, well, this is exactly a table. There's a table in there. This belongs to, the top of a table. Okay, fine. And I'll tell you, well, let's do the exercise again, a little bit more, I would say, let's say trickier. All right. So I go, come up front 5 feet. Go to the right 7 feet. Go up 3 feet. What was in there in 1975? Oh, now you got complicated, because I cannot guarantee that same table was there in 1975 or in 1812. We can't guarantee. So you see, the 4 parameters that define what we call the third dimension, one of them is very challenging, which is time. And in order to know what was there in 1975, we need to do some sort of, quotes, please, time travel. Or we need someone who has the ability to do that for us. That someone will be what we call a psychometry medium. A medium that has the ability to touch objects and go back in time, to pull history, to pull impressions of the owner, to pull memories, as we saw in the definition, that the owner has about that particular object. So the study of psychometry is a little bit challenging, but very interesting, very interesting. I think Marcia used the right word in the beginning, fascinating. It is fascinating. So how did we get into studying psychometry? There are some references which are, I would say, to say the least, interesting to know. We're going to start in around 1860, 1840, more or less. You see here on the screen, there was this guy, Leonidas Polk. He was a bishop. In Tennessee, in the Tennessee, Carolina, Georgia area. So he used to travel a lot in that area. And he had, from his younger days, he had this noticeable ability that at the touch of an object, he would tell a story. And it was, some people would say, oh, that's interesting. But it was something noticeable. He was being noted by a lot of different people that he did have that ability, that sensibility. Anyhow, time goes, the Civil War started, and he enlisted himself as a Confederate in the Civil War. So he said, no, I'm just going to go to the field, get my weapons, and I'm going to fight. Strange for a bishop, right? Anyhow, he did it. And strange things happened. For example, his group of soldiers, right? So you have a group, let's just say 20 soldiers. So he's one of them. So you got 20 soldiers. And you go after your enemy. So you see your enemy at a distance. Wars were different than what we have today, right? It was physical on the battlefield. So you see your enemy at a distance and you just go after them. So the whole group of 20 people are now running towards the enemy. And the enemy is running away from you. They don't want to get caught, of course. They don't want to get shot. So the enemies are getting away. But there might be a point where you just lose track of the enemy. You can't see anymore. There are trees. There are, it's a long distance. So what happens is he would find objects that the enemy's group accidentally dropped on the floor. So let's just say a soldier had a certain, I don't know, a knife, a small knife. And, when running away from the group beyond the spoke was on, they dropped this little knife. Bishop Polk would pick up the knife, concentrate, and would tell his groups, they went this way, this way, this way, they are in that location. The group would go in there and get the enemy. And that happened several times. So all the attention he had before by this weird and strange but noticeable ability to touch on objects and tell a story, it was becoming very serious because it became visible to people. People would see it happening in front of them. And he was able to do a lot of these things, to find the location of the enemies in several different instances by touching things that the enemy left behind. Very interesting. While this is all happening, a physician called Joseph Buchanan heard about this story before even he enlisted for the war. And he was getting interested in, we heard this guy does this and that. So he was studying this guy, Bishop Polk. And then the war came and all of what I just said became famous. So Buchanan said, this is more serious than we expect. So he, starts studying this very deeply. In 1849, he proposes a name for this sensitivity, for this ability. And the name he chooses is psychometry. It might not be a good name because if you look at the word psychometry, it's an association between two things, psycho, mind, and metry. Metry means measurement. And you're not really measuring anything psycho here. So it's a little bit strange. However, that's the word he came up with, and we still use this word to this day. So he was this professor on the Cincinnati University, medical institute, by the way, and he had access to a lot of resources. So he started studying this very seriously, and towards the end of his life, he published this book, Manual of Psychometry, in which he writes this phrase that you see here, the discoveries of psychometry. This is interesting. The discoveries of psychometry will enable us to explore the history of man, history of humanity, as those geology enable us to explore the history of the earth. So he says, when you study geology, you start to understand the history of the earth, the planet. When you study psychometry, you're going to start understanding the history of humanity. Isn't that interesting? This is in the late 1800s. So after this, another name becomes important, which is Bill Denton, William Denton. William Denton was one of these geologists. He was a professor of geology. And he was doing all of this research because he heard about the studies of Buchanan. So he wrote a book called The Soul of Things. What this book has is detailed reports of 110 experiments that he did. So he said, I need to find more people with the same ability. So he went out there trying to find more people with the same ability. He found a lot of people, and he published in details his findings about these 110 experiments about these psychometry mediums. Very interesting. And later, in closer to our days, we have Ernesto Bolzano, which is one Italian researcher, in which he said, well, when you look at psychometry, there is affinity here. There's some sort of affinity. He didn't know how to explain exactly. We know better now. But he said there's some sort of affinity here. And he goes to say there is some affinity between the sensitive medium, who is a person, and the aura of the object. For its time, is very audacious to say aura of an object. So, because he didn't know what words to use, but he got the idea there is affinity. Just like any regular mediumship, there's got to be affinity between the medium, for example, and the discarnate spirit. Not all discarnate spirits are able to communicate with every medium because it needs to have affinity. Same here. Not all psychometry mediums can pick up any object and tell a story. No, there's got to be affinity. However, the affinity is not with the object. It's not with the chair, with the pen, with the watch. The affinity is with the impressions that the owner left. So the affinity is with the owner. So one psychometry medium can pick up, let's say, a watch, and doesn't really get anywhere. Another medium comes up, picks up, and tells you the whole full-blown story because of the affinity he was referring to. So psychometry has three things. One is, of course, you need a psychometry medium. You need an object, so the medium is going to put his hand on an object or document, as they say. It's going to hold this thing. When you put these two together, then the result is you are able to bring information about either the object or the owner or both. And that becomes very interesting because this can be used in modern day research, and it is used. For example, if you find, or when we find, and this happens a lot, when we find a piece of archaeology, something new that we never saw, we had no idea, in a physical, geographical location that doesn't make any sense based on history and previous findings. You know, the archaeologists, they could be stunned in principle. How come this is here? So it is not very uncommon that they call psychometry mediums to put their hands on the object and see if they can tell a story about it. If they can give archaeologists guidance. Go this way to find more, go that way to find more. So it is something that we use today for new, unknown and unrelated to previous findings of archaeology pieces and elements. Another thing where psychometry is used is for criminal investigations. Not all of them, of course. But sometimes we have cases of missing persons. for example, and you can't find. It's hard. There are no traces, no trail left, no crime in principle. It's very, very hard. So, of course, the criminal investigation or looking for missing persons starts at everybody else, questioning family, friends, school, work environment. That's the way it goes for every investigation like this. But sometimes you just don't get anywhere. Dead end. After hours and hours, days, weeks, and months of research, you're at the same point where you started. You don't move, nothing. So in cases like this, psychometry mediums are called in. And usually it goes like this. They go to the family and say, pick up an object that the person who is missing was very fond of, very close to that object. It would mean a lot to that person. It had a sentimental value, something really strong that created a bond between the person who is missing and the object. So it could be a ring, it could be something, I don't know, whatever it was. So the family brings in and gives that to a psychometry medium. And what they do is they concentrate, they go through the process, soul disengagement, all of this. And they try to reach a point in the spiritual realm where they can gather information. And of course, the purpose is to find out where the missing person is. Sometimes dead, sometimes alive. Even being dead for the psychometry medium is not really an object because it's a spirit out there. And the person who is dead is also a spirit. So they would be able to find and tell things and tell general directions. Don't look south, look north. Don't look west, look east. They will bring up elements such as type of vegetation, type of houses and buildings. Anything of those in that direction will help because, the investigators had nothing at all. So psychometry mediums are also used, and it's a very useful task. They are used as in criminal investigations. One very special guy that I want to bring over here is Edgar Cayce, which hopefully is very familiar to the American public. Edgar Cayce was this guy who was able to go into deep sleep and bring a lot of information. And it starts very interesting. One day, out of the blue, he was, if I'm not mistaken, he was 12 years old. Out of the blue, he said to his brothers, I'm very, 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 it was an afternoon, very extremely tired. I don't know why. I'm very tired. I'm just going to, lay here down on the couch and take a nap. And he did for a couple hours. So he woke up all energized and starts talking to the brother. And he said, I saw this and this and this. And the brother, yeah, nice dream. Okay. However, this thing starts happening more and more. He is, at times, he's just led to lay down because he wouldn't be able to stay focused. And he would come and bring information. So he starts bringing information that becomes more serious. For example, he would wake up and say, and he was in Virginia, in the US. So he would say, this thing just happened right now in, let's say, California. So the next day in the news, that would be there. So his brother became very suspicious about this thing. There's something here that we need to understand. So they start doing more and more of this. So one day, Edgar Cayce tells the brother, when I go to sleep, before I go to sleep next time when that happens, ask me to bring information. Ask me to bring some sort of information that we don't know yet. So yeah, he would say things like, what happened on such day in such place. So he would wake up with the information. They would check it out, and right there it was. So the word goes out in the neighborhood. So now people in the neighborhood are writing questions about loved ones that had left, had discarnated. So he would sleep and bring the information back. When he was in deep sleep, the brother would read the question. So he would come back with the answer. And this thing became so serious that they started receiving lots and lots and lots of letters with questions. At the end, and everything was being written down. Everything was, they put a nice catalog of all the questions and answers. So at the end, he was able to bring answers to 14,000 questions. And these questions, these answers and questions were all cataloged in several different books based on subject. It's very interesting. So you see, his sensitivity was so tremendous. He didn't have to touch any object. He just had to hear the question. Very interesting. And also, there are reports of psychometry mediums being used for commercial practices, as you see here in the picture. For example, to find where can I find emeralds, for example. I want to, do a site exploration to find gems and special minerals. So, psychometry mediums are also used for that purpose. It's also interesting to know. The companies, of course, they pay for it, but that doesn't take away the ability that a psychometry medium has. So, the one thing that I need to tell you, two things. The emotions of the psychometry medium. Okay, so before he goes in trance, before he touches the object, of course he has his own emotions. The emotions of the psychometry medium may contaminate the object and erase its impressions. So if the psychometry medium, if his concentration is not very, very, very high, if he doesn't have a very high level of concentration, he can place his impressions on the object when he touches it. And that defeats the purpose. We don't want to read his impressions about the object. We want to read the impressions of the owner of the object. On the other book that we mentioned that goes with this that we are studying, the other book is called In the Realms of Mediumship. There are several cases related by the same author, André Luiz, about psychometry. I'm just going to tell you one of them because I think it's very, very interesting. So Spirit André Luiz, the spiritual author of the book, he is out with a group of other discarnate spirits. They are studying, and they are taken as part of their study. They are taken to a museum. They are all discarnate spirits. Okay, they go into a museum. André Luiz and his team, and the instructor Olas, that's his name. He says, you guys pay attention to what's going to happen here so you can learn what I'm going to teach you. So they approach within the museum a mirror, very nice, all nicely designed, very detailed design mirror. And they say, so the instructor says, stay here, keep looking at this. So 5 people, a group of 5 people come in, they're visiting the museum. 3 ladies and 2 gentlemen, they go in, and one of the ladies looks at the mirror and finds it really an incredible work of art. And she approaches the mirror very close, and she starts praising the work of art. Oh my God, look at this detail and that. Wow, so incredible. So she has the impression that somebody is touching her here, right on the shoulder. And then she looks and there's nothing. There's no one touching nothing. So she panics. And she runs outside the museum saying, This place looks like a funeral. There's something wrong here. And she screams and goes out to the streets. And then the instructor joins the discarnate spirits. André Luiz is one of them, and say, I'm going to tell you what happened here. That touch that she felt was a touch of a girl. And the story is, right after the French Revolution, in the aftermath of the French Revolution, and that was in about 1791. French Revolution is 1789. So this is 1791. Because of the war, because of the French Revolution, a French couple takes their young son, very young son, an infant, and go to Brazil. They flee to Brazil. They start their life in there. So, the boy becomes a man, a young man, and meets a young girl, so they become engaged. Meanwhile, back in France, the war ends, the aftermath is kind of past. Napoleon raises to power, and the political scenario becomes friendly enough for the couple to go back to France. So they take their son and go back to France. Their son is now a young man. And, he's going to have to break, the connection with the girl. They were engaged. So before leaving back to France, he gives her this nice mirror and says, hold this, keep this as a proof that I'm going to be back in your arms. As soon as we establish ourselves in France, I'll come back here, I'll get you, and we're going to get married. So that was a present, a gift. So the young man gives this girl the mirror. However, he goes to France and never returns. He meets somebody else, marries another woman. So they live happily ever after. Never happened with the girl in Brazil. So she was feeling more and more lonely every day, and so. But however, she still had the mirror all this time. She was holding on to the mirror because of the promise he had made. So the man dies, the woman dies, and somehow the mirror made its way into the museum, and it's right there. So the spirit André Luiz was in the museum and experienced all of that. Now knowing the history, they understand why around the mirror was this opaque, fluid, white streak, because it was the presence of that spirit that was holding on to the mirror 100 years after that. So for the girl, this mirror was still her mirror. She was still alive, living on earth, waiting for the man, when nothing of this was true anymore. She had died, he had died, However, she felt she was still the owner of the mirror. When a visitor to the museum approaches, she goes, hey, not here, this is mine, get out. And that's what the visitor, the woman that was visiting the museum, felt. Where does it take us? Where does this take us? And I try to put this in one phrase. Let's see if it works. For spiritists, in particular, us in particular, the understanding of psychometry can lead us to understand how attachment to material possessions while we are incarnate can lead us as discarnates later to experience immense difficulty in overcoming the sense of ownership and the sense of disengagement from objects and things. Just like that girl, she was the owner of the mirror to that very same day, years and decades after that. So you see, if we stay in living in our material realm here, attaching to things, having this full-blown idea that this is mine, we are very territorial, don't touch here, this is mine. As incarnate spirits, very likely we're going to do the same thing when we discarnate. So when we go, we're going to be by our car in the garage. We're going to be by our laptop on the desk. We're going to be by our TV set in the living room. So these stories like this is one of the stories in the book. There are more stories in that book, but they're all about the same thing. People who died and think they are entitled to eternal ownership of their possessions while incarnate. My friends, this is psychometry. It's interesting. I like what Marcia said. It's fascinating, at least for me. Thanks so much, Marcia. Your turn.
Thank you. This is so interesting. In a cautionary tale, right, Luis? What is our sense of attachment and why? What we do? Where will we stay when we should be gone, right?
Yeah.
But anyways, I wanted to ask you, if you don't mind, to maybe give us some final words, some
Sure.
words from today's teachings to all of us who are here listening to you, Luis.
Yeah, let's actually do a prayer here. Let's concentrate on the image of our master and guide, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus, for being an active part of our lives. Thank you for giving the opportunity to learn as we go along. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to experience what we need to experience to become better people. We pray for those in hospital beds, those who are overcoming diseases, some feeling very challenged. Jesus, that your fluids and your presence with them can make them feel better, hopeful for a different outcome. Also for those sitting in prison cells. Some of them don't even understand why they have been taken to places like this. That their revolt and rebellion in their hearts can be offset by your presence with them. Thanks so much for this opportunity, to all the higher spirits and our mentors and guides, and Jesus, of course. So be it.
So be it. Thank you so much, Luis, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.